All right, let's look at review number 6, which is the Age of Revolutions. And this is the transition from 9th grade material to 10th. And this is where I think it gets more interesting, of course, but I'm partial to 10th grade material. So here are your topics: Age of Reason, which includes the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, political revolutions, nationalism in general, industrial rev, the Meiji era or Restoration, and new imperialism. There is a theme of change or revolution that comes into play here. This thematic asks you to select two revolutions, describe the historical circumstances leading to, in other words, the causes of. Discuss the political, economic, and or social effects. Always think of the and or as and. Try to think of more than one effect because see, the plural is effects. Okay, so here are your choices: Neolithic Rev, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, which is also part of the Latin American revolutions, Industrial Rev, Russian Revolution, Mexican Revolution, Chinese Cultural Revolution, and Green Revolution agriculture. I don't think we spent any time on the Mexican Revolution. The Green Revolution is about using technology to produce more food. So, Age of Reason. Scientific revolution is going to use observation and experimentation. And the scientific revolution, you're going to have Copernicus, Galileo, Descartes, Newton. It starts with the heliocentric versus the geocentric worldview. And the geocentric was the worldview of the Roman Catholic Church, and they said God created the earth, so the earth is the center of the universe. And the scientists said, I've been looking through this telescope, another technology that was used, and I'm seeing that the earth moves, and it moves around the sun. And so they help prove mathematically that the sun is the center of the universe. In terms of the Enlightenment, their impact in the Age of Reason is huge. Locke writes the two treatises of government. Montesquieu writes The Spirit of the Laws. Voltaire writes Candide. Rousseau writes an essay called The Social Contract. They're talking about the natural rights of man. Locke says life, liberty, and property. Montesquieu says you need 3 branches of government. Voltaire says over here, I do not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. Rousseau likes direct democracy. He wants less laws and more participation of everyone. This, of course, will bring upon the American Revolution first, then the French Revolution, and the Latin American Revolution. The French Revolution is caused by high taxes, social inequality, absolutism, and the inability of Louis XVI to change, and lack of bread. So here you go, the French Revolution, rights or we fight, 1789 to 1815. Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, both lose their head to this new humane device, the guillotine. He was very ineffective. Here's some causes: financial crisis, economic troubles from food shortages, struggle over power. The French society in the 3 estates was in very bad condition, conflict between the monarchy and the nobility, taxes, taxes, taxes. Of course, there are 4 phases. The moderate phase actually is pretty bloody. You have the tennis court oath, then the storming of the Bastille, the Great Fear, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen is written then. Then you have the Radical, in which Maximilien Robespierre leads the Jacobins in the Committee of Public Safety. They don't keep many people safe because they end up killing almost 40,000 people with this new humane device, the guillotine. And you could get killed for not being revolutionary enough, for not seeming like you are completely against monarchy and completely for change. And Maximilien Robespierre will be killed himself in the Thermidorian reaction. It's called the Thermidorian reaction because it was part of this new revolutionary calendar in which they renamed the months, reduced them to 10 months a year instead of 12, and Thermidor was one of these months. When the Thermidorian reaction happens, Maximilien Robespierre is killed, and the Directory is established, a 5-man oligarchy. That will still have many problems, and so it will lead to Napoleon waging a military takeover, or a coup d'etat. Jacobin himself, part of the bourgeois class, and of course bourgeois means middle class, but in this case it's probably upper middle class. And Napoleon will give stability to France, and yet democracy will not happen in France for a long time. Nationalism, of course, grows in Latin America, of course. It starts with Toussaint Louverture in Haiti, which was a slave sugar colony, and they're going to gain their independence in 1804, and that's going to be important because that Napoleon will lose that. Simon Bolivar is the George Washington of South America, and of course he will lead the South Americans, and he has a dream that he wants to fulfill of uniting all of South America into a united South America. He calls it the Gran Colombia. Unfortunately, not everyone sees it that way, and his ally, Jose de San Martin, doesn't agree, and so these two split. In Mexico, you've got Father Hidalgo and then Father Morelos later, who are both people who tried to free Mexico from Spanish control. After the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo, after his horrible invasion of Russia, you get this idea of the Congress of Vienna. And it has three goals: balance of power, containment of France, and legitimate monarchs. And it introduces an alliance system called the Concert of Europe. You see here on this hodgepodge of snapshots, you have the Congress of Vienna was an assembly of the great powers: Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia. And basically they want a balance of power, balance of power. And what's weird is for 99 years they get it, because not until 1914 do we have an outbreak of a full-scale European war. The Mexican Revolution I did not talk about, and I need to talk about it now. There is this man named Porfirio Diaz, and he ruled as a dictator. Wealth was held by a small elite, and it was very much like the encomienda system. Most Mexicans were uneducated, landless, and poor. In 1910, the revolution begins, and Diaz is ousted. And there are key people who tried to change everything. One is Emilio Zapata, who is a Native American, and he calls for land reform. Another one is Francisco Pancho Villa, and he will try to flee to the United States at times and try to change things as well. Ultimately, they get a new president. His name is Carranza, and he and others form a new constitution, although instability and land reform issues continue to plague Mexico even today. Global nationalism, we have Zionism, and a guy named Theodore Herzl will start to introduce this idea that the Jews should live in the Holy Land, which is a form of Jewish nationalism. In Italy, we have Giuseppe Garibaldi. The unification comes down to three people. Garibaldi, the sword of the unification, in his red shirts, pictured here. Cavour, the brain. He orchestrates all of the deals. Mazzini, the heart. And the new leader, who is Italian, King Victor Emmanuel II. Italy unifies, and then Germany unifies. And Germany unifies under the guide of Otto von Bismarck, and he says we will unify through blood and iron, war and industry. He will fight 3 wars. He'll fight the Danes in the Danish-Prussian War. He'll fight the Austrians in the Austro-Prussian War. And he'll fight the French in the Franco-Prussian War, in which the people of Paris will be so hungry they will be reduced to eating rats, and the French will never forgive the Germans. And this is, of course, before World War I and World War II. And iron industry, Germany will become one of the most advanced industrial powers before World War I. Of course, Industrial Revolution will also happen during this time period, and England is the first to industrialize because it has a stable government, has money, has people, has natural resources, has a great navy, and location. This agricultural revolution will lead to the enclosure movement, which will lead to people moving to the cities in mass numbers, which is called urbanization. A Scottish man, Adam Smith, will talk about how England needs to move from mercantilism to capitalism. He'll talk about supply and demand and laissez-faire economics, in which the government should not be involved in business. Karl Marx, at the end of the Industrial Revolution, will see the hardships the workers face, and he will say workers should unite and that they should form a new utopian, communist, socialist government in which no one is rich and poor, that everybody shares the wealth, that everybody has jobs that they are best suited for, and there will be no more crime and no more problems. Karl Marx's theory that he writes with Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto will be put into place later. In Japan, you have a new transitional Meiji era, where they go from the Tokugawa shogunate to this Meiji era, and you see a Japanese man dressed more in Western uniform, and this woman also dressed in more of a Western American English dress. Commodore Perry comes in 1854. They sign the Treaty of Kanagawa. Japan says, we will take your Western technology, but we will remain Japanese. We will have Japanese thought. They beat the Chinese in the Sino-Japanese War, and they beat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. Of course, this leads to this time of European imperialism, industrialization. The Europeans want to get as much natural resources, raw materials, aka markets for their goods, and cheap labor. In China, of course, this leads to sphere of influences and the carving up of China. It also is this idea of social Darwinism coined by Herbert Spencer, that Europeans are the fittest of all the races. It's also expressed in the poem White Man's Burden by Rudyard Kipling. India becomes Britain's crown jewel. We see nationalism, though, in the Sepoy Mutiny, when the Muslims and the Hindus in the British Army, the Sepoys, are mistreated and their religious beliefs are disregarded. In the Berlin Conference, of course, that's the scramble for Africa. No Africans are invited to that conference, and the Europeans carve up the African continent. In the Opium War, the spheres of influence are completely related because the British were selling opium to Chinese people to try to stimulate trade, and the Chinese government was like, knock it off, you're making our people junkies. And the English said, make us. And so you get this war, which leads to the Europeans carving up China into those spheres of influence, as special trading privileges. And so China loses its ability to control its own economy. An example like the Sepoy Mutiny in India is the Boxer Rebellion in China, where these men who are part of this society of boxers, basically, they fight against the Europeans, and they literally yell, "Foreign devils, get out." This is just all of the areas the Europeans controlled by 1914. So let's practice. The writers and philosophers of the Enlightenment believed that government decisions should be based on fundamental religious beliefs, the concept of divine right, of kings, laws of nature and reason, or traditional values. Of course, the answer is laws of nature and reason. A primary cause of the French Revolution in 1799 was the increasing dissatisfaction of the Third Estate, rise of power of Napoleon Bonaparte, actions of Prince Metternich, execution of Louis XVI. Increasing dissatisfaction of the Third Estate. They wanted some political power. In a number of European countries in the 1800s, which situation occurred as a result of the influence of the French Revolution? Was it increase in religious conflict, rise of nationalistic movements, decentralization of governmental power, or economic depression? Of course, the answer is a rise of nationalism. Main causes. During the early 1800s, which was a major influence on the struggles for political independence in Latin America? Was it poor conditions in urban centers in Latin America, the American and French revolutions, the desire of the Roman Catholic Church in Latin America to escape European control, or demands by Latin American workers to own their own factories? Of course, the answer is the American and French revolutions. Which term refers to the Jewish movement to establish a homeland in Palestine? Is it Zionism, Marxism, animism, or secularism? Of course, the answer is Zionism. The theory of laissez-faire capitalism advocates by Adam Smith the government controls the economy, non-involvement of the government in the economy, government regulation of big business, or government sponsorship or support of labor unions. Of course, it's non-involvement because laissez-faire means hands off. An important result of the Industrial Revolution was the concentration of workers in urban areas, increased desire of the wealthy class to share its power, formation of powerful craft guilds, or control of agricultural production by governments. Of course, the answer is concentration of workers in urban areas, aka urbanization. In Japan, the period of the Meiji Restoration was primarily characterized by strict isolation, feudal government, religious revival, or reform and modernization. reform and modernization. Remember, they'll take the Western technology, but they'll keep their Japanese thought. Russia in the 1700s and Japan in the 1800s was similar in that both countries began the process of modernization after a long period of isolation, developed democratic governments after years under absolute monarchies, refused to accept Western technological ideas, or adopted socialist economic systems after capitalism had failed. The answer is 1. The Treaty of Tordesillas concerning Latin America and the Berlin Conference concerning Africa were similar in that each agreement provided for self-government by native peoples, declared that in these areas monarchs ruled by divine right, divided an area into European-controlled segments, or suppressed revolts by native peoples against European imperialists. Divided an area into European-controlled segments. The Boxer Rebellion of the early 20th century was an attempt to eliminate poverty among Chinese peasants, bring Western-style democracy to China, restore trade between China and European nations, or remove foreign influences from China. Remember, they yelled, "Foreign devils, get out." Okay, so that concludes this video. Hope it helps.